Hello and welcome to the latest edition of Impossible Mission here on the Geek Show, the semi-regular episode where we take something which has happened recently from the world of video game news and pad it out with all the side missions and fetch quests that the heart could ever not want. That's it, not want because they're terrible. My name is Rob, and as ever I am joined by my co-host. I was trying to think of a funny way of saying co-host there, but there isn't one, so I'll just stick with co-host. He's Rob too. Hello.
Hello.
Yeah, it wasn't really, Double Trouble. I was thinking Double Trouble, that makes no sense. He's not my doppelganger. He makes jokes about that constantly, about us not being brothers. Clearly, we're not brothers. Yeah. Just a big old brain fart. The sort of one where you're having an elevator and you blame it on somebody else. That sort.
Do you know what it is? He's been having this really weird run of good luck lately. He managed to get himself a Series X and a PlayStation 5 within a matter of weeks of each other.
Yeah, I don't know how that happened. I think I've got I've got to get a lottery ticket. I'm going to get a lottery ticket tomorrow. Let's get to the heart of the matter, which we are going to be talking about today. I don't know what episode it was on. Maybe the most recent episode of News Trash or the one before. Needless to say, it was the story. It seems like a small story in isolation as a thing separate from everything else. It is. It's just very small. China is getting the Xbox Series XS and PlayStation 5. They've been released around release.
They're all coming out in June in China.
Yeah, I mean, just saying that, it doesn't mean anything, does it?
No.
But there's this hidden, deeper significance. Because, we're talking about probably the biggest single consumer market on the planet, China. You give us, between that and India, you're splitting hairs, but they're very big.
Yeah, when you're talking about emerging video game markets, I'd say categorically India and Africa and South America in general you would class as an emerging video game market, and probably Russia as well. China, I'd say, is an established video game market. It's also probably the biggest video game market, or biggest single country video game market. 1.5 billion people in China, and of that, over 1.5 billion, I think now, but of that many people, over 500 million people, 500 million people in China play video games regularly.
You can't ask questions there of what is the type of video game they play. But that's just basically picking statistics apart. You could play whatever you want. The point is there's 500 million people doing it.
Just to put things into context, America, the United States of America, only has 330-odd million people in the entirety of the USA.
And there's more people in China who play video games. Yet the entire video game industry is basically dropping its pants for the American dollar.
Yeah. I mean, this is the thing. I mean, We've long known, right, historically China hasn't really had a good showing when it comes to its own video games.
But let's back it up a bit.
Yeah.
There's going to be people who are wondering why we're talking about Chinese video games, because there's this weird sort of, not colonialism, sort of territorialism when it comes to people around the world. Americans, as a perception, looking outside in, seem to have this issue with America. It's very patriotic to hate America. Much like in the way in previous decades it was patriotic to hate Russia.
Yeah.
So there's that. So why would we be bothered about China, Because, as you highlighted, there's lots of people who play video games, but also the way that China could potentially affect the industry, that hasn't started to even be a consideration yet. I know Tencent are the biggest video game organisation on the planet, but wider ramifications. I'm getting there. But wider ramifications, they haven't really started to come into play yet.
See, this is one of the things that I find odd about the video games industry, is that, as I said, China historically hasn't really had a good showing when it comes to video games, or homemade video games. Homemade consoles. Do we really want to go into all of the weird Chinese knockoff consoles? I mean, because there were a lot.
When we were sort of toying with the idea of this episode, we were thinking about maybe a Chinese games console, and I don't think there's going to be another games console coming out. Really, I think if anything, there's going to be less, and it's going to be a bit more low tech sort of technologies, like maybe learn some from the Game Pass going forward. So I don't think there's going to be anything that's competing in the tech front. But games development, that's a different matter altogether.
Yeah, the thing is, a lot of the Chinese video game market is PC-based. The majority of it is, in fact, PC-based. It's a weird mirror to what happens in Japan, Korea, and the Western world, where the majority of video games are played on consoles, handheld consoles or home-based consoles.
Yeah.
In China, it's the complete opposite. Most of the gaming is done on PC. And
but a question though, how much of that's just what they do, and how much of that is because they haven't had the console release there yet?
Well, part of it is because they haven't had the console release. I mean, there was a period of time where China actually banned video games.
I'm not surprised by that. There's some pretty pro-American things, and as I highlighted earlier, there's a lot of American-China friction. I
mean, the consoles, well, not video games per se, sorry. The video games were allowed, consoles weren't from 2000 to 2015.
That's kind of a weird, specific thing.
Yeah, but the thing is, that's also very recent.
Yeah,
you know?
Like 6 years ago.
Yeah, it's also very recent. So, 2015, the first PlayStation console that they would have had access to, I mean, China basically missed the entirety of the PlayStation 2.
Ah, well, they missed the best one.
Exactly. So the uptake of consoles in China has, for the last few years since the lifting of the console ban, hasn't really been that great. In the meantime, they banned the import of consoles, but they did make their own versions of consoles. And this is where all of those weird copies of Western consoles came into play.
Yeah.
Western consoles, by Western, I mean Japanese as well in this context. Obviously talking about the PlayStation and the Nintendo consoles as well. But this is why you have such a weird market in China now that's starting to find its feet. And a couple of things that have given us hints as to the future development of the Chinese video game market. There was that trailer for that Wukong game. Was it Black Legend Wukong, was it?
That sounds right, yeah.
Which, okay, to all intents and purposes, it looks like your prototypical third-person action adventure. Yeah?
Yeah. But there's also been other things. There's that Bright Legend Infinity, I think it was called, for the Xbox Series X. That's developed, I think, by one Chinese guy.
Yeah.
It was a little indie game, which the first Chinese game I played, which was Koi. A little sort of fish, sort of like what was it like? It was, I don't know, that game company was like a Flower or something like that. Or Floor or something, I can't remember which one. The big one, the one which is really going to make that market, and the people who make games, or could make games in China, open their eyes, is probably the biggest success of the last year, which was Genshin Impact. New success. There's other games older which have been more successful, but, and Genshin Impact is basically going to have, much in the same way that The Witcher 3, its huge success basically was a Frankenstein lightning bolt into the forehead of stagnant monster to create, that's a really tortured analogy, but you know what I mean. Frankenstein's monster's on the roof, lightning bolt, ooh, I'm alive, polish for the game industry. And the same is happening with China. And, by pure comparison points, there's a lot more people in China than there is in Poland, so the impact should be a lot bigger.
Yeah. Yes. Exactly.
I took a long way around to saying that, but you know what I'm getting at.
But there's also the presence of a lot of Chinese-based games on mobile devices. That seems to have been the massive growth area for Chinese gaming, and I think it's been a great jumping-off point for games development in China. You only need to look at the success of Genshin Impact.
Yeah, I mean, you have to look at the success of the mobile phone market as well, and the tech industries. Once upon a time, China were famous for being copyists, like making Mercedes-Benz and then putting their own badge on it.
Yeah.
Mobile phones are the same. They were kind of, 10p tacky crap. And now pretty much about 6 of the top 10 mobile phone companies are all Chinese.
Yeah.
So that's not going to stay with tech. That is basically the Chinese philosophy when it comes to innovation. Start slow, but lightning. They go like lightning once they get that momentum. I'm interested when that hits the video game industry wider than just mobile phones.
I'm going to throw some things out here, just to gauge your reaction, right? Because I've had long thoughts about why the Chinese have taken this weird copying approach.
It wasn't a law, was it? It was just completely free to copy.
This weird copying approach. I wasn't talking about law or anything like that, but just seems like the Chinese mentality was, we'll copy all these things. They even did it with buildings, right? They've got their own copies of famous buildings. There's like an entire town where all it is loads of different touristy places from all over the world. I have some thoughts about that, in fact. Number one has to kind of do with martial arts. Okay. I can see the look on your face. You're really confused as to the link.
Yeah. Not all martial arts are Chinese, before anybody thinks that we're going to say that.
Exactly.
So
That's why I said martial arts. Okay? Didn't use the term karate or kung fu or anything like that. I said martial arts in general. Yeah. See, in martial arts, there is the principle before you truly understand martial arts, you have to learn the basics, and you only do the basics by copying.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
And so now that they've got all the copying out of the way,
just put another way, it's like when you're learning guitar, you'll copy your favourite songs.
Exactly.
You'll play. You get the sheet, the fret sheet for the guitars, and you'll play it until you know how to play music. And then you'll start doing your own stuff, unless you're one of those terrible cover band people.
And the thing is, good basics, if you get the basics down, that will be a solid foundation upon which you can build future development.
Yeah.
And if you're copying video games from the West, if you're copying consoles from the West, if you're trying to do that first and learn how it's done, then you've basically set yourself a pretty solid foundation as a jumping off point for future development, which I think is what they've done. Right, I think that a lot of what's gone into the Chinese video games market has been quite strategic in a way, and we just not paid attention to it in the West because, well,
like I said, there's friction.
Yeah, there's friction, and there's also the casual arrogance of being better.
And not casual, open racism, isn't it? There's nothing casual about it.
There is quite open racism, but I think the casual arrogance plays a bigger part than the racism. You've got Microsoft who make consoles, and Sony make consoles, and Nintendo make consoles, and they made consoles for all of this time. And like China, they only make those fake copy consoles. China ain't gonna make a console. China, they make those copy games. You're better off buying our games. Our games are better quality. And then you see the trailer for Black Legend Wukong or that MMORPG. There's an MMO that came out in January this year.
Black Desert, it was called, wasn't it? Black Desert Online. I think they're making a
Black Desert was Korean, wasn't it?
I'm thinking of something else then.
There's one that came out earlier this year though, called Tale of Immortal, right? And it's had it's out in early access, I think, on Steam, and it's had really positive reviews from quite a lot of people. It's something like 91,000 positive reviews if you take them all together.
That's pretty good. That's very good, in fact.
Yeah, and it's an MMO, and that
seems to be where the Chinese market has its interest.
Yeah, and
just weirdly specific, but sure.
The thing is, when you look at some of the games that have come out of the Chinese market, I mentioned Genshin Impact. That really blew up on mobile devices. And the game that came before it, Honkai Impact, I've been very careful about how I said that, Rob.
Honkai, yeah. Nothing to do with Paul Blart Mall Cop at all.
No, Honkai Impact. It didn't, it did okay, I suppose, but in terms of selling, it didn't do anywhere near as well as Genshin Impact. And you have various other games that are kind of variations on the same kind of idea. But for some reason, it worked with Genshin Impact, and they hit it out of the park. But other games, other really popular games that people don't realize are Chinese,
Like?
My Time at Porsche.
Not even heard of that, but I'm assuming it's a thing.
My Time at Porsche came out on PC, Switch, PS4, and Xbox One. It was published by Team 17, right? But the developer of the game is a company called Pathé Games, who are Chinese.
Interesting.
And this is the thing. We already have Chinese games in the Western market that we don't realize are Chinese games because the developer is going to be someone like Square Enix or Team 17 or someone like that.
The real thing is when, I said Tencent are the biggest video games publisher on the planet.
Yeah.
But they haven't really acted like it.
Yeah, exactly.
When they start acting like it, it's going to basically be up there with EA, Ubisoft, and the like as one of the true titans.
Yeah.
And for me, it's like talking about all of this that's going on in the background. It's all fine and well. But I'm always more interested in the potential of video games, what could possibly come from this. And that is really, really intriguing, because let's be frank. The Japanese video game industry has basically crashed.
Yeah,
compared to what it was in the 90s, it has crashed.
The Japanese video game industry is basically the Switch. That's it.
Yeah. So there is a position there for a new sort of power to rise up as a video game development hotbed.
Well,
and I think China could be it. There's little pockets here and there. Sweden has a good number. We talked about Romania has a good few. Poland, the UK, a lot in America. Korea is bubbling. It's getting there. But China is the huge giant which, could really do some stuff.
China is literally the sleeping dragon. Quite literally the sleeping dragon.
Mm-hmm.
Korea has a very good history of video games, and they really try to do some interesting stuff.
Esports is a huge thing in Korea.
Exactly. Esports is a huge thing in Korea, but, they do some interesting MMOs and stuff like that. There was, however, because I remember seeing the trailers for stuff like Black Desert and that. I was like, ooh, this looks pretty good. I might give that a try. But there was a trailer for an MMO that came out, I think around 2015, that I saw, and I thought, that looks really good. What is this game? Because the trailer was all in Chinese, didn't have a clue what it was called. It's called Revelations Online, or Revelation Online, if I remember rightly. And I just thought, that's really interesting. That looks like an interesting game that I would love to try. And I have since tried it, and it's got some great concepts when it comes to how an MMO is played, which, again, it comes back to this whole idea of building on what they've done before and, laying proper foundations for future development, which it leaves us in a weird position. I think the Western stranglehold on the video games market, and the Japanese stranglehold and the Korean stranglehold, I think it's not as firm as it used to be. It
was always America and Japan there were the two big titans of video game industry, but Japan has kind of fallen asleep at the wheel a little bit, even only America. And it's why, you get this increasing, they call it globalization, but can we stop using that word?
Yeah.
Because that's not what, when people say globalization, what they really mean is Americanization. It's a different thing altogether. So, China, I think, is the interesting case study about once it catches on, once the Genshin Impact and Wukong really sort of land, and I think Wukong will be a success because in that space, there's been nothing like it in the action game space. There's been absolutely nothing like that. I think the closest is probably, was it Journey to the West? What was it called on the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360? The one I'm on about is basically Journey to the West.
Enslaved.
Yeah, Enslaved, which is probably the closest you got to it, but that's not really that close. But the success of those will breed success.
Success breeds success. So. One of the things that I really like about the idea of Black Legend Wukong is, and this is mainly about China. I'm just using this as just an example. We've seen games that haven't come out from mainland China that have focused on the character of Sun Wukong, and they've been very cartoony and stuff like that. So Dragon Ball is definitely Sun Wukong. The thing I love about the character of Sun Wukong, number one are the names he's given. It's not just Sun Wukong. He is also known by the name the Great Sage Equal to Heaven. I love the fact that there is a character. The thing is, I love the fact that there is a character in mythology who is known by the title the Great Sage Equal to Heaven.
Yeah, that sound better in Chinese, won't it? Or in Mandarin or Cantonese.
The thing is, the reason why he's called that is because he picked a fight with, like, all the immortals and gods in heaven and beat the shit out of them.
Here's an idea. Just play with it.
Yeah.
What's it called, the game again?
Black Legend.
Black Legend Wukong. What if it's the God of War of Chinese mythology?
Yes, and that is what I'm hoping for. I am hoping for God of War, but Chinese.
What if it's that? The success as well, not just the sort of namesake. That
would be really fascinating just to see happen and see the fallout of that, because it would put the wind up a lot of developers in the West.
Oh, it would. It would.
That would scare the bejesus out of them.
And the Chinese film industry is unsung as well. It's a growing giant too. The storytellers you have in China, the filmmakers you have in China, the actors, the talent that you have is incredible, honestly. And if that got behind the video game industry, you basically, it's a big deal.
The thing is, there's one franchise in China which I know about, and I know how popular it is in China. Really popular in China. It's an RPG franchise called The Legend of Sword and Fairy, right? I think there's like 6 or 8 games in the franchise so far. It's always been criticized because it's not been very well optimized, and it's got janky controls, but it's always been praised for the story and the acting, right? So it's this weird thing, and possibly with refinement of control systems and development of that, it might be possible that a future iteration of that franchise would make it big in the West.
Stands to reason.
If it's already been praised by critics for its story and its acting, then all you need to do is sort out the controls and the optimization, and you're done.
There's a few sort of issues, I think.
Yeah.
One, there's this, China has a problem with art and art censorship.
Yeah.
And the art, which does make it global, has this very jingoistic tone to it. If they can sort of circumvent that and make it a little bit more approachable to a wider audience rather than just a Chinese audience. I mean, it's fine to appeal to a Chinese audience, but there's more people out there. There's more captive art markets out there. So if they get rid of it, tone down the jingoism, I think that'll stand them in great stead.
Yeah,
and the second point, this is something you talk about constantly, and I sort of phase out every time you start talking about them. Yeah. Rob talks a lot about Chinese light novels.
Yes, I've read a lot.
Chinese light novels is basically, here's this big bloody archive of things you can turn into video games.
Yeah, and there are things that I call otaku bait when it comes to anime and manga.
Yeah.
Right, there's a Chinese web novel that is basically gamer bait.
Okay.
Right, and I mean that quite literally. It is the epitome of gamer bait. It's called Black Technology Internet Cafe System.
That is a fantastic title. Don't change a thing.
Games on show in there are a VR version of the original of the new version of Resident Evil.
Yeah.
The virtual reality remake version of it.
Yeah.
So you are first person perspective completely.
Yes, you made the point. Move on.
Yeah. They have a couple of the Legend of Sword and Fairy games. They have the Assassin's Creed VR remake games where you actually play the assassinations and that. And so it's just like all about your skills and movement and stuff like that. And it's all set in a world where basically a cultivation world. And
I think you have to explain that concept to people.
Okay, cultivation being the whole Chinese idea of cultivating the body, becoming immortal, cleansing the body, gaining superpowers, yada, yada, yada. Very basic description of that. It's not complete, so don't criticize me. I already know, but I don't have time on this episode to explain it fully. If you want to know more about it, Google is your friend.
Yeah, I just wanted to, basically back of a mouse mat sort of description. You scroll it quick. And you did that, that's fine, but go on.
Yeah, meditate, open your meridians, channel your chi around, and basically gain superpowers and immortality. That's it. There you go.
Move on.
So, yeah. So there's loads of Western games included in this novel, right? Including God of War.
Funnily enough.
Including God of War. And one of the things that always sticks with me whenever I think of God of War 4 is how that game is depicted in this novel, with Kratos being a dad, and the reaction to it from kind of the citizens of this world who are like, Kratos has a son? When did he get a son? Who's the wife? Where was the wedding? Why wasn't I invited?
Yeah, to be fair, Kratos' skin is that colour because of ashes of his previous family. So he's kind of a dark guy. He's got a character with a dark history.
Yeah, I know. Just the reaction, though, from the people of the world saying, why wasn't I invited to his wedding?
Right. But yeah, the point is, there's so many stories. There's looking at the Chinese film industry, they don't really do what's the name? Wuxia movies, stuff like this. The layman's term for that is sort of martial arts movies, fantasy, historical martial arts movies.
Yeah.
They don't really do that. The film industry's moved past that. It was a trend. That's fine. It made a lot of money. They don't really do it anymore. Video games is as well the perfect home for that.
Yeah,
There's all these little perfect little circumstances of fate, which means China could make some phenomenal games in areas which don't really get touched by other people because they're going for the big first party sort of story thing or the multiplayer stuff. There's a hole in the market which is uniquely what China equipped to tackle.
You know, the whole flying swords thing is something that you don't see in video games ever.
No. Like I said, there's a hole which is uniquely there for China and China alone to tackle it.
Yeah, and I would be really interested in seeing China tackle it.
Yeah, because there's Jade Empire, which wasn't a Chinese game, just to clarify, but it did touch upon Chinese history and mythology. And that's just kind of whet the appetite. It says, I want more of this. Where is it all?
Well, this was the thing. It was a BioWare game, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And I wanted the Jade Empire 2. I wanted Jade Empire 3. I wanted more Jade Empire.
Yeah, and now I think China will be pouncing on the potential that territory has to, shake up the video game industry.
I'm just throwing this out there as a potential idea. Tencent or whoever, Tencent, NetEase, whoever is listening into, from developers and publishers in China, martial arts based MMO. That's all I need in life. A good martial arts based MMO where you basically, you can engage in competitions if you want, but you have to train and do. Well, basically, you know how it goes. You've got all the stories. You know what to do.
Yeah, but let's just wrap it up. I want to wrap it up with this sole thought. Yeah. Personally, I want all countries to make video games because there's games that can only be made from those places. I think the same of India too. I know nothing about India, so I couldn't possibly begin to comment on what sort of stories they could make. But everything which is true for China is true for India too. Any country has the capacity to make games, I believe, should make games because it makes a much richer and much more interesting and varied marketplace. I am not being woke, I am just being reasonable and want the video game world to be as broad and as welcoming a church as possible.
Yes. And just to close things off, I know people have their reservations about China, so I will say this. In terms of Chinese video game development, I think China will have basically really kind of entered video games in a free and open way when they make a Winnie the Pooh game.
It sounds like a joke, but yeah, totally. It's a great way to end this episode on. It's a great way to end. Oh yeah, and there's also them, isn't there? The Red Star Games, is it? Or Red Sun?
Yeah.
But they're Taiwan, and Taiwan's already got a games industry, so,
Yeah, exactly.
Up.
Red Candle is what you mean.
That's it, Red Candle, yeah. But on that, thank you very much for listening to this. It is a hypothetical episode, but at the same time, I think it's a hypothetical with both feet planted in reality and just a few years ahead of the curve, maybe.
Yeah.
So, we'd love to hear from you. We'd love to chat with you in the comments down below. But until next time, which I believe it's either going to be about live service games or PlayStation handheld, one or the other. We'll be back soon with that, either way.
Yes.
And thank you for sticking with us to the end. We have a Patreon. Some of the patrons are running on screen right now. We'd like to thank all of them. And yes, we will catch you on the next video.
Bye!